Hi, everybody. Chris Pugh here again. Wanted to look through just a topic on some mixing technique that I like to try and use. And this one is specifically regarding drum gating and stuff. It's definitely one of those things that gets used a lot, especially in rock and pop music when you've got a drum kit going on. And, there's good reason for it. You think about practicalities and such. This is the reality. There is that a lot of times we kind of need it for control, considering that a lot of the individual drum head or drum skin inputs are gained up to a point where the largely transient information can pass through, and when it does have when you do have a lot of microphones that are within close proximity to one another. However, we're trying to kind of capture, you know, pieces of a drum kit that then ultimately make up one drum sound. A lot of times, because of the proximity of these microphones, they kind of bleed together a little bit. Just thinking about what the noise gate is and what it does. Let's see. You've basically got a on your most basic gate here. I'm just going to kind of pull up one. I'm going to pull up one that doesn't have that's not engaged right now, just to kind of show you the control. So on the Digico gate, which is this lower section here, these are the options and the controls we have. So threshold, attack, hold, release, range, and then we have these frequency areas that can basically kind of refine where that threshold's gonna or where it's going to actually open up based off of that. So just talking a little bit about what they're doing. If the signal input crosses the threshold, that is indicating that it's going to actually open up. The attack time, attack, hold, and release, without getting into too much detail, is basically how fast it opens, how long it stays open, and then how fast it's going to close. The range is determining how much reduction is taking place and how much it's being attenuated when that signal does not cross that threshold. So in the most basic of functions, you would basically get up there. If you're going to first start dialing in a gate and you're just going through line check, the typical thing you do is you gain up your input source, turn the thing on, and then mess with the threshold a little bit, and then work on your attack, hold, and release times to determine the kind of sound you're looking to get out of it. Because just like in the same way that other dynamic processors such as compressors, your tonality changes based off of your attack and release times. It's very much in the same way here with a gate. And then your range, if you're trying to knock nearly all of the signal out, the higher you go. And on this particular gate, the more you twist it to the right, the more you're attenuating when it's not past that threshold, versus when it's lower like this, it's only attenuating down so far. So some basic operation there. Now, the interesting piece here is, and the one thing that I think that a lot of engineers tend to fight or struggle with when doing this is, especially when it's being when it's just listening to that one source. When it's only listening to that one source, based off of that dynamic threshold that it crosses. Drummers, like every other musician, are human beings, and what is to say that they're going to absolutely hit that drum in order to then fire that gate at the exact same pressure all the time. Even in rock and pop music, there are these things that we once knew as dynamics. And you're going to find a lot of this stuff. You're going to find a lot of this stuff not so applicable in music styles such as maybe jazz or classical or something along those lines, or orchestral, where where you really are not needing to have that transient poke through so much. However, you also don't want to miss any of the lower level dynamics in there. So, you know, we don't want to miss anything on rock and pop music either. However, sometimes just using the actual signal itself isn't enough to be able to actually get that control because of the other close proximity. Again, speaking here, because those other microphones are open, what's to say, like, when you set one particular input low enough to where it's going to fire every time, and then there's a good example here is maybe a set of rack toms. You have like a first rack tom, and then directly next to it is another rack tom, and then you hit the first one, it opens, and then you hit the second one. Well, it also might fire the gate on the first one because those microphones are not very far apart, and those acoustic sources are very close together. So, you know, we can mitigate this somewhat by using microphones that have a really, really good pattern and have very fast transducers in them. However, you know, sometimes we do need to take it a step further. So when I talked about that filter element a little bit, I'm just going to kind of bring that back. That's one way you can kind of do this. You can actually raise. You've got an overall range here, and then you can determine how large or small of an area, and you can kind of key in on, say, the fundamental, maybe the fundamental resonant frequency that you really hear on the attack of that particular of that particular percussive instrument, and maybe that's one way to do it. You know, and in truth, that works out better than, say, not using it. You can definitely do that. There's another little trick you can do if you do have some time. And so in this instance, I am using, as far as the gating, this is on the Digico SD9, obviously. And I am using some waves processing for some equalization, some dynamic processing, or some compressor processing. However, I'm not using it at all for the gate, and I'll kind of go into why here. So there's another function here. We can actually look directly beside the on button that says key. So in this case, I have it keyed to another input. And what I've done on this other set of inputs is basically taken some of the feature sets of what the filter option allows and kind of expanded upon that. And I actually label these inputs trigger. And that term comes from the fact that another way to key these things is to actually put mechanical drum triggers on your drums and be able to have that mechanical vibration trigger. You know, it's not going to create a very pleasing sound. However, you know, anytime that particular shell gets, or the head gets struck with that shell, it's going to, you know, it's going to automatically fire that. So it's using actual triggers is typically one of the most surefire ways, no pun intended, to make sure these things fire at the appropriate times. So, my work around here is kind of a go-between. Basically, it's the sense of, like, I have the available channels. However, what I'm not really interested in doing at this point in time is running additional lines and additional mechanics and stuff like that. So what I've done in this case is actually taken all of the primary inputs for kick, snare, in this case I'm using snare top, and all of the tom inputs, toms 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what I've done is basically double patch those inputs to other channels named by their instrument, and then I'm just calling them trigger. And you can see that I basically have filters brought out and in to kind of accentuate the fundamentals. Now, from the initial look here, it looks like I'm just kind of taking that and boosting that with an EQ. What I'm actually doing is I'm actually using the dynamic EQ portion of this. So it's that frequency that's going to key that is not boosted all the time, even though it says it's like, yeah, 54 hertz is boosted 11.5 dB. Well, it only gets boosted when that is struck, and so that element there enables me to, by using the dynamic EQ versus just a regular EQ, it enables me to keep these things a little bit more under control, and so I can set those thresholds. So as you can see from just kind of extrapolating there a little bit, this does take a little bit of time to set up and get working right. However, when it does, it really does help out and get you a little get you basically the next best thing to having an actual mechanical trigger on that particular drum, while just basically you're burning channels, because the actual sound that's coming out of that is not something you're really going to want to add back in or it's going to use anywhere. However, it's basically the perfect companion to be able to have an external source trigger that threshold and when it fires. So what I'm going to try to do here is actually do a little bit of a demo. I'm going to try to set the I'm going to set the phone camera down and keep it in a spot where hopefully you'll be able to sort of hear what's going on. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to sort of toggle on the toms here. I'm just going to basically, I'm not going to go back and forth and turn the gates on and off. What I will do is basically play a quick excerpt here from as it is right now, which is where the filters are, and then I'm going to go back through and I'm going to turn the key filter, or the key the key input, which were those other key trigger channels that I mentioned before. I'm going to turn that off and have it just key off of the normal threshold. And it may be kind of hard to hear in this situation, but hopefully you'll be able to tell, like when I turn those off. The example is you're basically going to hear a lot of toms basically just firing and triggering off of other sources, because one of the things you're able to do with this is actually use a lower threshold, because you don't require the immense amount of percussive transient to actually make that threshold fire, and things basically become much more controlled. So here we go. I'm just going to change microphones real quick and get this thing sitting stable, so you can so you can hear what's going on. Okay, so here we are. So this is the example with the key filters in place, drums only. Okay, and this is the example with the filters just back on. This is the example with the filters back on just a regular input source from where they're keyed. Okay, so I can definitely hear a difference here. Something that may stick out, at least this is what I'm hearing, is that when it's just filtered with just the individual channel source keying the input, is that basically they are the gates are triggering even when those particular drums are not getting hit. And where this comes into play is that what this can do is kind of add up and ultimately cloud spaces here in the cloud space in the mix, and makes things kind of mush together versus having things a little bit more individualized and separated. So hope this helps, makes sense, and maybe sparks an idea. I actually learned this from one of the episodes listening to Signal to Noise podcast. So Someone mentioned this, and I thought, you know what? Why not go ahead and give it a try? Or no time like the present, because here we are all still pretty much sitting at home, not doing shows. But I happen to be fortunate enough to have my console set up in the garage. So hope you're all doing well, and let me know if you have any questions or if you'd like any clarification on some things that are being done here. All right, cheers, everybody.